There is a moment in every life, a pause so profound that the rhythm of existence itself seems to falter. For me, that moment came not in the chaos of some grand event, but in the stillness after. It was the kind of quiet that follows a storm when the air feels electric with something unspoken, and the earth itself seems to hold its breath. I was sitting by a window, watching the late afternoon light stretch long shadows across the floor. Outside, the world carried on as it always does, oblivious to the reckoning happening within me. I had lived over 6 decades by then. By all accounts, I had done well-built a career, raised a family, weathered losses, celebrated milestones. Yet, for all my years, I realized I had never truly understood the why of things. Why some moments seemed to burst with serendipity while others crushed under the weight of misfortune. Why certain people crossed my path, leaving marks I couldn't erase, while others faded like distant echoes. I had always thought life was like a game of dice, random and capricious, but as I sat there, reflecting on the threads of my own story, I began to sense a pattern, a weaving too intricate to be mere chance. It wasn't just the big events, either. It was the small things, the letter I found tucked in an old book, the stranger who offered a kind word on a day I thought I couldn't go on, the decision I made on a whim that led me to the place I now call home. They all felt connected somehow, like the stars forming constellations in the vast night sky. I think we all come to this realization in our own time. Perhaps it's the gift or the burden of age. The longer we live, the more we see how the threads of our choices, our actions, and even our thoughts are woven into the lives of others. It's not always easy to face. When I was younger, I clung to the idea that life was something that happened to me, that I was a passenger on a journey I couldn't control. Blaming circumstances felt easier than taking responsibility. But now I see things differently. Imagine, if you will, a loom vast, cosmic, its threads stretching across the fabric of existence. Each thread is a life, and every moment of joy, pain, or indifference is a stitch in the grand design. There are no loose threads, no accidents. Even the tangles have their purpose, shaping the beauty of the whole. It was Eamon, an old friend and mentor, who first put these thoughts into words for me. Life is precise, he would say. What seems like chance is only a law we don't yet understand. At the time, I dismissed his words as philosophical musings, too abstract to be useful in the grit of daily living. But Eamon was patient. He knew that some truths take time to take root, like seeds waiting for the right season. I didn't know it then, but my season was coming. It would arrive with questions I wasn't prepared to ask and answers I wasn't ready to hear. And yet, when the moment came, it was as if the universe had been waiting for me to notice, to listen, to step into the role I had always been meant to play, not as a victim of circumstance but as a participant in creation. The cosmic loom was always there. I just hadn't seen it yet. The strange how life introduces you to certain truths not all at once, but in pieces, like the scattered fragments of a mosaic. You don't see the whole picture at first. You pick up one piece, then another, fitting them together with a quiet sense of wonder until, eventually, something clicks. For me, the first piece of the puzzle was handed to me by Eamon, though I didn't realize its significance at the time. Eamon was not what you'd call an ordinary man. He moved through the world with an air of quiet certainty, as if he could see beyond the surface of things. He had this way of speaking that made you lean in closer, not because he demanded your attention, but because his words seemed to carry a weight you didn't want to miss. I met him on a day like any other, during one of my long walks by the river. I was lost in my thoughts, as I often was back then, and somehow, we ended up sitting on the same bench. "You think the world is chaotic," he said after a while, breaking the silence between us. His voice was calm, almost matter-of-fact, yet it carried the hint of a question. I glanced at him, surprised. "Isn't it?" I replied, gesturing toward the bustling streets in the distance. "Look at the news. Look at the way people treat each other. Nothing makes sense anymore." He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that held no judgment, only understanding. "It makes sense," he said, "but not in the way most people expect. Everything follows a law, even if we don't always see it." I wanted to argue, to tell him life was too messy to be governed by laws, but something about his tone made me pause. He wasn't trying to convince me. He was simply stating what he knew to be true, like someone describing the color of the sky. "What law?" I asked, not quite ready to let go of my skepticism. "The law of cause and effect," he said. "Every event, every thought, every action, it's all part of a chain. What seems like chaos is simply order we don't yet understand." I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to dismiss his words as philosophical nonsense, the kind of thing people say to sound wise. But another part of me, the part that had spent so many sleepless nights wondering why things happened the way they did, was intrigued. Eamon leaned forward slightly, as if he could sense my hesitation. "Think about it," he said. "Have you ever had a moment in your life that seemed random, only to realize later it was exactly what you needed? A chance meeting, a decision you didn't think much of at the time, something that set you on a path you couldn't have foreseen." His words stirred something in me. Memories surfaced, moments I hadn't thought about in years. The day I met my late wife, purely by accident. When I took a wrong turn on my way to an appointment. The time I chose to take a job I wasn't sure about, only to find it led to opportunities one never could have imagined. Even the painful moments, the ones I'd tried to forget, seemed to carry a strange kind of logic when I looked back. "Are you saying everything is predetermined?" I asked, my voice tinged with doubt. "Not at all," Eamon replied. "We are not puppets, nor are we prisoners of fate. The law of cause and effect is not about predestination. It's about connection. Every cause has an effect, and every effect becomes a new cause. We are part of the process, whether we realize it or not." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "What we call chance is simply the name we give to causes we don't yet recognize. But once you see the threads, you can begin to understand the pattern." The conversation stayed with me long after Eamon left. It was like a seed planted in my mind, one that began to grow in the quiet spaces of my thoughts. I started noticing the small things, the way my mood affected the people around me, the way a kind word could ripple outward, creating effects I couldn't always see. I realized that the law Eamon spoke of wasn't just some abstract concept. It was woven into the fabric of everyday life, hidden in plain sight. And so, I began to wonder, if everything in life follows this law, what role did I play in it? Was I merely reacting to the causes around me, like a leaf carried by the wind? Or could I become something more, an active participant, a creator of causes? These questions would shape the next chapter of my journey, though I didn't know it yet. For now, I only knew that the world no longer seemed quite so chaotic. There was a design, even if I couldn't see it clearly, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a quiet sense of hope. There comes a point in life when you begin to see beneath the surface of things not just what they are, but what they mean. It's not about having answers to every question. It's about noticing the connections you missed before. That's how it started for me. Slowly, like dawn creeping over the horizon, the world began to reveal its layers. It was Eamon who first spoke to me about the levels of causality. I remember sitting with him in a quiet park, the air heavy with the scent of freshly cut grass. A family played nearby, their laughter carrying on the breeze, and I watched as a young boy tossed a ball to his dog. The dog, a wiry little terrier, caught it midair every time, never missing a beat. The scene was simple, unremarkable even, yet it felt like a metaphor for something much larger. "You see the ball," Eamon said, breaking the silence. "You see the dog catching it. But do you see what's behind it?" I raised an eyebrow, unsure of what he meant. "What's behind it?" "Everything," he said with a faint smile. "The boy's throw, the arc of the ball, the dog's leap, it's all connected. But even that is just the surface. Beneath it are the boy's intentions, his joy in the game, the dog's instinct, his trust in the boy, and even deeper still, there's the bond between them, built over countless moments of care and play. The physical act is just the tip of the iceberg. I frowned, trying to follow his train of thought. Are you saying there's more to causality than what we can see? Exactly, he said, his tone gentle but firm. Most people live on the physical plane. They see actions and reactions, cause and effect, as if that's all there is. But causality runs deeper. It operates on the mental and spiritual planes too. What you think, what you feel, even what you believe, these are the seeds of every cause. I sat back, letting his words sink in. The idea wasn't entirely new to me. I had heard people talk about the power of positive thinking, the idea that our thoughts shape our reality. But I had always dismissed it as wishful thinking, the kind of sentiment you find on greeting cards. Yet as Eamon spoke, I began to see it differently, not as a cliché, but as a truth I had overlooked. Think about the last time you spoke in anger, he continued. That moment wasn't born out of nowhere. It was the result of a thought or feeling already brewing inside you. Wasn't it? I nodded reluctantly, recalling more than a few heated moments I wasn't proud of. And that word spoken in anger, what did it create? Did it calm the storm? Or did it add fuel to the fire? It added fuel, I admitted. Every time. Exactly, he said. And that's how it works. Thoughts lead to emotions. Emotions lead to actions. Actions lead to effects. It's a chain, unbroken and undeniable. I thought about the countless times I had blamed circumstances for my frustrations, the traffic jam that made me late, the rude cashier who ruined my mood. It had never occurred to me that my own reactions, my thoughts and emotions, were just as much a part of the equation. I had been looking at the world through a narrow lens, seeing only the surface. Most people spend their lives reacting, Eamon said. They're like leaves blown by the wind, at the mercy of forces they don't understand. But the truth is, the most powerful causes don't come from the physical world. They come from within, from the mind and the spirit. That's where the real work begins. As I sat there, watching the boy and his dog, I felt something shift inside me. For the first time, I began to see my own life through this new lens. The arguments I'd had, the choices I'd made, even the moments of joy, they all traced back to something deeper. The thought, an intention, a belief. I realized that if I wanted to change my life, I couldn't just focus on what was happening to me. I had to look at what was happening through me. Eamon gave me a challenge that day. Pay attention, he said. Watch your thoughts. Notice your emotions. See how they shape the world around you. And when you're ready, start planting new seeds. Seeds of love, gratitude, and courage. The harvest will surprise you. It wasn't an easy task. Old habits die hard, and I had spent years letting my mind wander wherever it pleased. But slowly, I began to take control. I noticed how a single thought of gratitude could lift my spirits, how a moment of kindness could ripple outward in ways I couldn't predict. I began to see the connections Eamon spoke of, the invisible threads weaving my life into the lives of others. Looking back now, I see that this was the turning point. It wasn't a dramatic moment, no thunderclap or revelation. It was quiet, almost imperceptible, like the first green shoot breaking through the soil. But it was enough. It was the beginning of something new, a deeper understanding, a new way of being. And for that, I will always be grateful. When you've lived long enough, you start to notice patterns in your life. You see how certain struggles repeat themselves, how certain relationships seem to echo others from years gone by. It's easy to dismiss these as coincidences, but as I've come to learn, there are no coincidences. Life is far more deliberate than that. Eamon called it karma. I had heard the word before, of course, but never gave it much thought. To me, it sounded like something mystical, far removed from the everyday reality of paying bills and navigating family dynamics. But Eamon had a way of making even the most abstract ideas feel tangible. Karma, he told me one afternoon, as we walked along the river, is simply the law of cause and effect operating across lifetimes. It's the threads you've woven in the past coming back to you in the present. I stopped to watch the water flow over the rocks, listening to the rhythmic sound of the current. You're saying everything I'm experiencing now is because of something I did in the past? Not just what you did, he said. What you thought, what you felt, the intentions behind your actions. Karma isn't punishment or reward, it's balance. It's the universe reflecting back what you've put into it. I didn't know how to respond. Part of me bristled at the idea. Like so many people, I wanted to believe that some things in life were just unfair, that the pain I'd endured was random and undeserved. But as I stood there, watching the river, memories began to surface, moments where my choices, my words, and my actions had clearly set the stage for what came next. There was the time, years ago, when I let anger get the better of me during an argument with my brother. We didn't speak for months after that, and by the time we reconciled, the damage had already been done. That rift shaped our relationship in ways I didn't fully understand until much later. And then there were the choices I made out of fear, the opportunities one let slip away because I doubted myself, the connections I severed because I was too afraid to be vulnerable. Those threads, too, had come back to me, their effects woven into the fabric of my life. Karma isn't about blame, Eamon said, as if reading my thoughts. It's about learning. Every thread is a lesson, a chance to grow and create something better. The question is, will you use it? As we walked, he told me stories of a man who had abused his power in one life and was born into poverty in the next, learning humility through hardship, of a woman who spent her life seeking love outside herself, only to find in her later years that the love she sought had been within her all along. These weren't just tales of cosmic justice. They were stories of growth, of transformation. What about you? I asked, curious. What have you learned from your threads? He smiled, a distant look in his eyes. Patience, he said. Compassion. The hardest lesson of all, accepting responsibility for my own life. Those words stayed with me. Accepting responsibility is not an easy thing to do, especially when the weight of your choices feels too heavy to bear. But as I began to reflect on my own life, I realized that responsibility was not the burden I had always feared it to be. It was liberation. If I was the cause of my struggles, then I could also be the cause of my healing. If I had woven the threads of my karma, I could choose to weave new ones. And so, I began to approach my life differently. Instead of blaming circumstances or other people for my pain, I started looking inward. What had I contributed to the situation? What could I do differently next time? It wasn't about self-blame, it was about self-awareness. I also started noticing the small ways karma played out in everyday life. A kind word spoken in a moment of frustration often came back to me as an unexpected act of generosity. A decision to let go of resentment opened doors I didn't even know were closed. The threads I wove with intention and care seemed to carry a different energy, one that brought harmony instead of discord. But the most profound lesson was this: karma isn't about keeping score. It's not about tallying up good deeds to outweigh the bad. It's about alignment. It's about living in a way that reflects the values you hold dear, even when it's hard, even when no one is watching, because every thread matters, every thought, every action, every choice, it all becomes part of the tapestry. Looking back now, I see how much I've changed. I'm not the same person I was when I first met Eamon. I've made peace with the past, not because it was easy, but because I finally understood its purpose. The pain, the joy, the lessons, they were all necessary. They were all part of the grand design. And so, I ask you to consider your own threads. What are you weaving today? What seeds are you planting in the fertile soil of your thoughts and actions? The answers may not come right away, but they will come. The loom is always turning, and the threads are always being woven. All we have to do is pay attention and choose. There's a moment in every journey when the road you've been walking shifts beneath your feet. It's not always a dramatic event, more often. It's quiet, almost imperceptible. like the tide pulling back before a wave. For me, that moment came when I realized the difference between reacting to life and mastering it. I had spent much of my life reacting. Like most people, I believed I was at the mercy of circumstances. If someone hurt me, I reacted with anger or withdrawal. If life handed me a disappointment, I reacted with bitterness. Felt natural, even inevitable, as though my emotions were beyond my control. But Eamon saw it differently. "You're not a leaf on the wind," he told me one day as we walked through the park. "You think life is happening to you, but it's happening through you. That's the difference between a victim and a master." The words stayed with me. A victim and a master. I wasn't sure which one I was or which one I wanted to be. But as I reflected on the choices I had made, the patterns I kept repeating, I began to see that Eamon was right. I had been living as a victim of my own reactions, letting my emotions and circumstances dictate my life. I was the leaf, carried wherever the wind decided to blow. "You can't control the wind," Eamon continued, "but you can choose how you set your sails. That's mastery, not avoiding life's challenges, but meeting them with intention." First, the idea felt overwhelming. How could I possibly master my life when there were so many things beyond my control? The economy, other people's actions, even the weather, none of it was up to me. But Eamon wasn't talking about controlling the world. He was talking about controlling myself, my thoughts, my actions, my reactions. "Start small," he said. "Pay attention to the choices you make every day. Are they driven by fear, by anger, by habit? Or are they aligned with the person you want to be?" So I began to pay attention. It wasn't easy. Habits, especially the ones you've carried for decades, don't die without a fight. I noticed how often I let small frustrations, traffic, a rude comment, a long line at the grocery store dictate my mood. I saw how quickly I fell into blame when things didn't go my way. But I also started to notice something else: the power of choice. One evening, after a particularly difficult day, I found myself at odds with an old friend. She had said something that hurt me, and my first instinct was to lash out, to defend myself. But then Eamon's words came to me: "You're not a leaf on the wind." I took a breath. Instead of reacting, I paused. I chose to respond with kindness, even though it wasn't easy. To my surprise, her demeanor softened. What could have escalated into a bitter argument became an honest conversation. That moment stayed with me, not because it solved all our problems, but because it showed me what was possible. Mastery, I realized, wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about always making the right choice or never losing your temper. It was about awareness, about recognizing the power you have in every moment to shape your experience. It was about planting seeds of intention, even in the midst of chaos. Over time, I began to see mastery as a kind of inner alchemy. Instead of reacting to life's challenges with fear or resentment, I tried to transform them into opportunities for growth. When I felt anger rising, I asked myself what it was teaching me. When I faced a setback, I looked for the lesson it carried. And when I felt overwhelmed, I reminded myself that every storm eventually passes. I won't pretend it was always easy. There were days when I fell back into old patterns, when the weight of the world felt too heavy to bear. But even in those moments, I saw progress. I saw how far I had come from the person who thought life was something that happened to her. I saw the threads I was weaving, threads of patience, of compassion, of courage. Eamon once told me, "The true master isn't someone who controls the world. It's someone who knows how to align with it." At the time, I didn't fully understand what he meant. But now, as I look back on my journey, I see the wisdom in his words. Life will always bring challenges. The wind will always blow. But mastery isn't about changing the wind, it's about learning to sail. And so, I leave you with this: you are not a victim of life. You are not a leaf on the wind. You are a weaver, a creator, a master in the making. Every thought you think, every choice you make, every seed you plant, it all matters. It all shapes the tapestry of your life. The question is not whether you have the power to change. The question is whether you're ready to use it. There's a quiet kind of strength that comes with age. It isn't the strength of a young athlete or a sharp intellect. It's the strength of someone who has weathered life's storms and emerged with a deeper understanding of what truly matters. For me, that understanding began to take shape the day I decided to stop fighting life and start working with it. I used to think life was something to be conquered, a series of challenges to overcome, obstacles to push through. But the more I tried to bend life to my will, the more it resisted. Disappointment, frustration, and exhaustion followed me like shadows. I spent years carrying that weight before I realized the truth. Life isn't a battle to win. It's a dance to learn. Amen called it alchemy. Life will give you all the raw materials you need. He told me one day as we sat beneath a sprawling oak tree, the joy, the pain, the triumphs, the failures, it's all there. But it's up to you to decide what you do with it. The alchemist doesn't resist the raw material. They transform it. At the time, his words felt more poetic than practical. I didn't understand how I was supposed to transform the bitterness I felt after a betrayal, or the grief that clung to me after losing my wife. Those emotions felt too heavy, too raw to mold into anything useful. But Eamon was patient. Start small, he said, as he often did. What's one thing in your life you could see differently? I thought about his question for days. One morning, as I drank my coffee and stared out the window, I remembered something my wife used to say whenever we argued. We're on the same team. It was a simple statement, but it always stopped me in my tracks. It reminded me that even in our disagreements, there was love. Even in the friction, there was connection. And so, I decided to try seeing my pain through that lens. Instead of resisting it, I asked myself what it was teaching me. I started small, as Eamon suggested. When frustration bubbled up, I asked myself what I could learn from it. When grief overwhelmed me, I looked for the love that lay beneath it. Slowly, the emotions that once felt like burdens began to feel like teachers. Alchemy, I discovered, isn't about denying your emotions or pretending life is perfect. It's about taking what life gives you and finding the value in it. It's about turning bitterness into understanding, fear into courage, loss into appreciation. It's about recognizing that every experience, no matter how painful, carries a seed of growth. I remember one particularly difficult day when I faced a painful memory from my childhood. For years, I had carried resentment toward my father for his harsh words and distant manner. That resentment had shaped many of my relationships, often without me realizing it. But as I sat with the memory that day, something shifted. I saw my father not as the imposing figure I had feared, but as a man struggling with his own pain. I saw his actions not as deliberate wounds, but as the echoes of his own unhealed scars. And in that moment, something unexpected happened. I forgave him. Forgiveness, I learned, is one of the greatest acts of alchemy. It doesn't change the past, but it transforms the way you carry it. It lightens the load, frees the heart, and makes space for something new. That day, I didn't just forgive my father. I forgave myself for holding onto the resentment, for letting it shape me, for not knowing better sooner. And in doing so, I felt a kind of peace I hadn't known in years. As the months passed, I began to see life itself as a process of alchemy. Every challenge was an opportunity to grow. Every loss was a chance to appreciate what remained. Every mistake was a lesson in disguise. It wasn't about avoiding pain or seeking constant happiness. It was about finding meaning in whatever life brought my way. Eamon once told me, the true alchemist doesn't turn lead into gold for the sake of wealth. They do it for the transformation itself, for the joy of creating something new. At the time, I didn't fully understand what he meant. But now, as I look back on my journey, I see the beauty in those words. Life will always give us lead difficulties, heartbreaks, uncertainties, but we have the power to turn it into gold, to shape it into something meaningful, something beautiful. So I ask you, as I once asked myself, what will you do with the raw materials life has given you? Will you resist them, carrying their weight as a burden? Or will you transform them, shaping them into something that serves you and the world around you? The choice, I've learned, is always ours, and in that choice lies our greatest power. As you age, you begin to see life differently, not as a collection of isolated events but as a vast, interconnected tapestry. Each thread, no matter how small, contributes to the larger design. You start to realize that the moments you thought were insignificant were, in fact, the foundation of everything, and the decisions you made without much thought rippled further than you could have ever imagined. I remember sitting with Eamon one afternoon in his modest study. The room was filled with books, their spines worn from use, and the scent of old paper hung in the air. He spread out a piece of fabric on the table, a patchwork of intricate patterns and colors. "This," he said, "is what life looks like when you step back far enough to see it." I studied the fabric, its threads weaving in and out, creating shapes that seemed chaotic up close but harmonious when viewed as a whole. "And when you're in the middle of it?" I asked. "When all you can see is a tangle of threads? That's the challenge," he replied, his voice steady. "We spend most of our lives too close to the loom to see the design. But if you can step back, even for a moment, you'll see that every thread has its place. Even the ones that seem frayed or out of place are part of the greater pattern." I thought about his words for a long time after that. There were so many threads in my own life that felt tangled, relationships that had ended painfully, choices I wished I could undo, moments of loss that still weighed heavy on my heart. It was hard to imagine how any of it could be part of something meaningful, let alone beautiful. But as I reflected, I began to notice the connections. There was the friend I lost touch with after a bitter disagreement. At the time, it felt like an unbearable failure, a wound that wouldn't heal. But years later, that loss taught me the value of forgiveness, a lesson I carried into every relationship that followed. And there was the job I didn't get, the one I thought I desperately wanted. That rejection led me to an opportunity one never could have foreseen, one that shaped the course of my life in ways I'll forever be grateful for. Each thread, I realized, had its purpose. The painful ones, the joyful ones, even the ones I didn't understand, they all wove together to create the story of my life. And the more I looked for the connections, the more I found them. It was as if the universe had been whispering all along, "Trust the design." But seeing the design is only part of the journey. The real challenge, Eamon said, is understanding that we are not just passive observers of the tapestry, we are also its weavers. Every thought we think, every action we take, every choice we make adds a new thread. And those threads don't just affect our own lives. They intertwine with the threads of others, shaping a tapestry far larger than we can imagine. One of the most humbling moments of my life came when I realized how my threads had touched others. There was a neighbor I barely knew, a quiet woman who lived alone. One winter, I shoveled the snow from her driveway without giving it much thought. Years later, she told me that simple act of kindness had come at a time when she felt invisible. A reminder that someone saw her, that she mattered. That thread, as small as it seemed to me, had woven its way into her life in a way I never could have predicted. And then there were the moments when others' threads wove into mine, like the stranger who helped me when my car broke down on a desolate stretch of road. He stayed with me until help arrived, his presence a reminder that we are never truly alone. His thread became part of my story, just as mine became part of his. As I sit here now, reflecting on all of this, I am struck by the profound interconnectedness of it all. Life is not a series of isolated events. It is a dance of threads, weaving in and out of one another, creating a tapestry so intricate and vast that we can only glimpse its beauty in fleeting moments. But those moments, when they come, are enough. They remind us that we are part of something greater than ourselves, a design that stretches beyond time and space. And so, I leave you with this thought: your life, too, is a thread in the infinite tapestry. Every choice you make, every word you speak, every act of kindness or courage adds to the design. You may not see the full picture now, you may never see it in this lifetime, but trust that it is there. Trust that your thread matters, that it is essential to the whole, because in the end, it is not the individual threads that make the tapestry beautiful. It is the way they come together, weaving a story far greater than any one of us could create alone. In the end, life isn't about having all the answers. It's about learning to live with the questions and finding peace in the spaces between them. As I reflect on the journey that has brought me here, I see it not as a series of separate events, but as a single, unfolding story. Every moment, every choice, every thread has led to this one. I never set out to master life. If I'm honest, I didn't even know what that meant for most of my years. Like so many others, I stumbled through the days, reacting to whatever came my way. I let anger guide me in moments when I should have paused. I clung to resentment long after it served any purpose. I made decisions out of fear instead of courage. And for a long time, I told myself that was just the way life worked: chaotic, unpredictable, beyond my control. But age has a way of softening those edges, of showing you the patterns you were too close to see before. The longer you live, the more you come to understand that control was never the goal. Mastery, I've learned, isn't about avoiding life's challenges or bending the world to your will. It's about learning to dance with it, to move in harmony with its rhythms, even when the music changes. Eamon used to say that a true master doesn't escape the law of cause and effect. Instead, they embrace it. They learn to plant their seeds with intention, knowing that every thought, every word, every action will one day bear fruit. Freedom, he told me once, isn't found in escaping the law. It's found in understanding it. I didn't fully grasp what he meant at the time, but now I see the wisdom in his words. Freedom isn't about avoiding consequences or running from responsibility. It's about owning your role in the grand design. It's about recognizing that you are both the weaver and the thread, the creator and the created. I think back to a moment that changed my perspective forever. It was a simple act, almost forgettable in its ordinariness. I had been sitting at a cafe, lost in thought, when a young man dropped his wallet nearby. Without thinking, I picked it up and handed it to him. He thanked me, his relief palpable, and hurried on his way. I didn't think much of it at the time. It was the kind of thing anyone would do. But a week later, I received a letter in the mail. It was from the young man. He had tracked me down to thank me again, explaining that the wallet contained a photograph of his late mother, the only one he had. "You didn't just return a wallet," he wrote. "You returned a piece of my heart." That moment stayed with me, not because it felt extraordinary, but because it showed me how even the smallest actions can ripple outward in ways we'll never fully understand. It reminded me that mastery isn't about grand gestures or monumental achievements. It's about the quiet choices we make every day, the seeds we plant in the fertile soil of the present. Now, as I sit here in the twilight of my life, I feel a deep sense of gratitude, not because everything went the way I wanted it to, far from it, but because every moment, even the painful ones, has been part of the journey. The losses taught me to cherish what remains. The mistakes showed me the value of growth. The challenges pushed me to discover strength I didn't know I had. And through it all, I've come to see that life isn't something that happens to us. It's something that happens through us. We are not passive observers. We are active participants, shaping the world with every thought, every choice, every breath. So, what does it mean to become a master? It doesn't mean perfection. It doesn't mean avoiding pain or escaping the messiness of life. It means facing each moment with awareness, with intention, with a willingness to learn. It means planting seeds of love, courage, and gratitude, even when the soil feels rocky. It means trusting that the tapestry is being woven, even when we can't see the whole design. If I could leave you with one thought, it would be this: you are not too old, too late, or too small to make a difference. Every thread you weave matters. Every choice you make shapes the tapestry. And while you may never see the full picture, know that it is there, beautiful, intricate, and vast beyond imagination. Life is the loom, you are the weaver, and the masterpiece is already in progress.